The blood from Kessa's split lip tasted like shame, but it was the taste of her own tears that had sealed her fate among the war band. She had stood in the center of the warriors' circle, as her chieftain's daughter Marga pointed at her with a thick green finger, declaring that any orc who would weep at the sight of battle scars was too weak to call herself one of the clan, too soft to deserve the protection of strong warriors who bled for their people every day. The other orcs had joined in the condemnation, their voices rising in a chorus that drowned out any explanation Kessa might have offered, not that she could have spoken past the tightness in her throat anyway. She had not been crying from fear or weakness, but from the memory of her brother, lost in a raid 3 winters past, when she saw the jagged scar across the young warrior's chest that looked so much like the wound that had taken him from her. But grief was not an acceptable excuse, not when the clan valued strength above all else, and so they had beaten her and cast her out with nothing but the torn leather tunic on her back and the boots that were already worn through at the soles. She ran because staying meant more punishment, more humiliation, and possibly death if Marga decided that exile was not enough. The forest swallowed her as she fled, branches whipping at her face and arms, roots trying to trip her stumbling feet. Her lungs burned and her legs screamed for rest, but she pushed forward through the darkness, guided only by moonlight filtering through the canopy above. Time lost meaning as she ran, walking when she could no longer manage anything faster, then forcing herself into a shambling jog when she heard sounds that might have been pursuit, or might have been her imagination turning every snap of a twig into a threat. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Kessa had left the deep forest behind and found herself in rolling farmland she had never seen before. The clan's territory ended miles back, which meant she was in human lands now, and that should have terrified her more than it did. Humans killed orcs on sight most of the time, or captured them for sport or slavery. But she was so tired, so hungry, and so hollowed out by the events of the past day that fear seemed like a luxury she could not afford. Her feet carried her forward along a dirt road rutted by wagon wheels, past fields where early crops were just beginning to show green shoots in neat rows. She smelled the farmhouse before she saw it, the scent of wood smoke and animals and growing things reaching her nose and making her stomach clench with hunger. When she crested a small hill, she saw it nestled in a shallow valley, a sturdy wooden structure with a barn nearby and fenced pastures stretching out on either side. Chickens scratched in a yard near the house, and she could see goats in one of the pastures. It looked peaceful in a way that made something in her chest ache, a kind of safety and permanence that she had never known even in the clan. She should have turned away, should have kept moving and found somewhere in the wilderness to make whatever life she could manage alone. Instead, her traitorous legs gave out at the top of the hill, and she collapsed into the grass beside the road, her body finally staging a full rebellion against everything she had put it through. She lay there staring up at the brightening sky, wondering distantly if this was how she would die, cast out and alone in a foreign land where no one would even know her name to speak it over her bones. The sound of footsteps approaching made her try to rise, but her muscles would not cooperate beyond a weak twitch. A shadow fell over her, and she squinted up at the figure backlit by the morning sun. Human. Definitely human, tall and broad-shouldered with light brown hair that looked almost golden in the dawn light. He was staring down at her with an expression she could not quite read, surprise and wariness mixed with something that might have been concern. "Don't kill me," she managed to croak out, her voice raw from running and crying and the dust of the road. "I mean no harm." The human man did not move for a long moment, and she could see him taking in her appearance, the torn clothing and the bruises already darkening on her green skin, the split lip, and the way she could barely lift her head. His eyes were a warm brown, she noticed, like rich earth or strong tea, and they did not hold the hatred she had expected to see there. "I am not going to kill you," he said finally, his voice a deep rumble that was somehow soothing despite her situation. "But I need to know if you are being pursued. Is anyone coming after you?" She shook her head as much as she was able. "Cast out. They will not follow. Not worth the effort." He studied her for another moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. Before she could process what was happening, he was crouching beside her and sliding one arm under her shoulders and another under her knees, lifting her with surprising ease. She wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body had other priorities and simply went limp in his arms. "My name is Vincent Sharp," he said as he carried her down the hill toward the farmhouse. "You are on my land now, and I will not turn away someone in need, even if you are an orc, especially since you clearly cannot hurt anyone in your current state." "Kessa," she whispered, managing to give him her name before exhaustion dragged her down into darkness. When awareness returned, she found herself lying on something soft, softer than anything she had ever felt in the clan's camp where they slept on piled furs and woven mats. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light filtering through a small window. She was in a room, a human room, with wooden walls and a floor instead of packed earth. The bed she lay on had actual blankets, thick and warm, and someone had removed her boots and cleaned the worst of the dirt from her face and hands. The door opened, and Vincent entered carrying a tray that held a bowl of something that smelled so good her stomach immediately growled loud enough to make him smile slightly. It was a careful smile, not mocking but cautious, as if he was unsure how she might react. "Vegetable stew," he said, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "I was not sure what orcs eat, but I figured this was safe enough. There is bread too and water." She pushed herself up to sitting, wincing as her bruised muscles protested, and took the bowl he offered with hands that shook slightly. The first spoonful was heaven, simple and hearty and exactly what she needed. She forced herself to eat slowly despite wanting to devour the entire bowl in seconds. "Thank you," she said when she had taken the edge off her hunger. "You did not have to help me." Vincent settled into a wooden chair near the bed, keeping a respectful distance but staying close enough to talk. "No, I suppose I did not. But I am not in the habit of leaving people to die on my land, regardless of what they are. You were in bad shape when I found you. What happened?" The question made her tense, the shame of her exile flooding back. "I was punished for showing weakness. For crying in front of warriors. They beat me and cast me out." His expression shifted to something darker, anger flashing in those brown eyes. "They hurt you for crying. For showing emotion. Orcs value strength," she said, the words tasting bitter. "Tears are seen as weakness, especially in front of those who fight for the clan. I should have been stronger, should have controlled myself better." "That is cruel," Vincent said flatly. "Emotion is not weakness. It is what makes us alive, what makes us care about anything beyond mere survival." "Your clan sounds like a harsh place." She had never heard anyone say such things before, had never even considered that the clan's ways might be questioned. "It is how we survive. The world is hard, especially for orcs. Humans hunt us, fear us, hate us. We must be strong to endure." "Strength comes in many forms," he said, leaning back in the chair. "The strength to feel and still keep going is worth more than the strength to simply hit harder than the next person. But you are exhausted and hurt, so this is not the time for philosophy. Eat, rest, and recover. We can figure out what comes next when you are stronger." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she would leave as soon as possible and not burden him further, but her body betrayed her with another wave of exhaustion. The food was making her sleepy, warmth and fullness combining with the softness of the bed to drag her back toward unconsciousness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Most humans would have killed me or turned me away." Vincent was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant as if looking at something only he could see. "I spent years as a soldier, fighting in wars that seem pointless now that I am out of them. I saw too much cruelty, too much unnecessary suffering. When I came back and bought this farm, I promised myself I would try to be better than what I saw in those years. That means helping where I can, even when it is complicated." She wanted to ask more, wanted to understand this strange human who defied everything she had been taught about his kind. But sleep was pulling her under, and she could not resist its call. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Vincent pulling the blankets up over her shoulders with a gentleness that made something in her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with pain. The next several days passed in a blur of sleeping and eating and slowly healing. Vincent checked on her regularly, bringing meals and fresh water, changing the bandages on her cuts, and applying a salve to her bruises that smelled of herbs and made the aching fade. He did not press her with questions or make demands, simply gave her the space to recover while ensuring she had what she needed. On the fourth day, she woke feeling more like herself. The worst of the pain faded to manageable soreness and her strength beginning to return. She rose from the bed and explored the small room for the first time, finding her boots cleaned and placed by the door, her torn tunic replaced with a simple shirt that was clearly meant for a man but fit her well enough if she tied it at the waist. There was a basin of water on the table, and she used it to wash properly, scrubbing away the last traces of the road and the fight that had preceded her exile. When she emerged from the room, she found herself in the main area of the farmhouse, a single large space that served as kitchen and living area combined. Vincent was at the table working on something, papers spread out before him and a pencil in his hand. He looked up when she entered and something that might have been relief crossed his face. "You are up," he said, setting the pencil down. "How do you feel?" "Better," she admitted, taking in the space around her. The farmhouse was simple but well kept, everything clean and organized in a way that spoke of a man who took pride in his home. "Strong enough to leave and stop being a burden to you." "You are not a burden," he said firmly, "and you are welcome to stay as long as you need. But if you are feeling up to it, I could use some help around the farm. I am behind on several projects and an extra pair of hands would be valuable if you are willing to work for your keep." The offer surprised her. She had expected him to agree that she should leave now that she was recovered, or perhaps to extract some kind of payment for his kindness. "You want me to work for you. I want to offer you a place to stay while you figure out what comes next," he corrected. "The work is just a way to make it feel less like charity if that matters to you. And honestly, I could use the help. Farming is a lot for one person." Pride warred with practicality inside her. She had nowhere to go, no plan beyond surviving one day at a time. And the thought of staying here, of having a purpose even if temporary, was appealing in a way she had not expected. "I am strong," she said finally. "I can work hard. What do you need done?" Vincent's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes and transforming his whole face into something warm and welcoming. "I have fences that need mending, a vegetable garden that needs weeding, and the barn roof has a leak I have been meaning to patch. Take your pick." She chose the fences, wanting to be outside in the open air after days confined to the small room. Vincent showed her where the tools were kept and which sections of fence needed attention. then left her to work while he headed to the fields to tend his crops. The work was physical and demanding, exactly what she needed to feel like herself again. Her muscles protested at first, but soon fell into the familiar rhythm of labor, and she found a deep satisfaction in seeing each section of fence restored to usefulness. The sun was high overhead when Vincent returned, carrying a basket that turned out to contain bread and cheese and apples for their midday meal. They sat in the shade of a large oak tree near the pasture, eating in comfortable silence for a while before Vincent spoke. "You are a good worker," he observed. "You have done more in a morning than I would have managed in 2 days." "Orcs are strong," she said, then added more quietly, "It is one of the few things I can still claim after everything." He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you have not told me the full story of what happened. You said you cried in front of warriors and were punished, but there must be more to it than that. If you want to talk about it, I am willing to listen. If not, that is fine too." Kessa had not talked about it with anyone, had barely let herself think about the details beyond what was necessary to keep moving forward. But something about Vincent's steady presence and genuine interest made the words start to come, slowly at first, and then faster as the story poured out of her. She told him about her brother Crag, who had been her closest friend and protector growing up, who had taught her to track and hunt and fight. She told him about the raid 3 years ago that had gone wrong, how Crag had taken a spear to the chest protecting the chieftain, and had died before anyone could help him. She told him about how she had not been allowed to grieve properly, how the clan had said his death was glorious, and tears dishonored his sacrifice, so she had swallowed her pain and tried to be strong the way they demanded. "But then I saw that young warrior with the scar," she continued, her voice thick with emotion she no longer tried to hide, "and it looked so much like Crag's wound, and suddenly I was back in that moment when I held him while he died. The tears just came and I could not stop them." Marga saw and started yelling about weakness, and the others joined in, and it all happened so fast. Vincent was quiet when she finished, his jaw tight and his eyes dark with anger that she understood was not directed at her. "Your clan was wrong," he said finally. "About grief being weakness, about punishing you for being human. Well, for being a person with feelings. You understand what I mean." "I do not know if they were wrong," she said, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. "Maybe I am weak. Maybe I do not deserve to be part of a warrior clan." "Then maybe you deserve to be part of something better," Vincent said firmly. "A place where strength is valued but so is compassion, where grief is allowed and tears do not make you less. You are welcome to stay here as long as you want, Kessa. Not as a burden or a charity case, but as someone who pulls her weight and has just as much right to safety and peace as anyone else." She looked at him, this human who had every reason to hate or fear her kind, but who instead showed her more kindness than her own clan ever had. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." He sighed, turning his gaze out toward the fields. "When I was a soldier, I did things I am not proud of, followed orders that resulted in suffering, fought in battles that achieved nothing but more death and pain. There was a village in the 3rd year of my service where we were told enemies were hiding. We were ordered to search every building and root them out. I was going through a house when I heard crying from a back room. Found a woman there with her children, hiding and terrified. She begged me not to hurt them, and I realized in that moment that I had no idea who the enemy really was supposed to be, or why we were even there." "What did you do?" Kessa asked softly. "I told her to stay hidden and stay quiet, and I reported the house as empty. Then I finished my tour of duty, took my discharge, and used my saved pay to buy this farm as far from any fighting as I could get. I swore I would never again stand by while someone suffered if I could help." So when I found you on my land, beaten and broken and cast out for the crime of having feelings, there was no question about what I would do. They sat in silence after that, the weight of shared pain and understanding hanging between them in a way that felt almost sacred. Kessa realized that this human soldier-turned-farmer understood her in a way her own clan never had, saw her as a person rather than just another body to throw at whatever problem needed strength applied to it. "I will stay," she said finally. "For a while at least, if the offer is genuine." "It is," Vincent assured her, "for as long as you want." The days turned into weeks, and Kessa found herself settling into life on the farm in a way she had not expected. She woke with the sun and worked until her muscles were pleasantly tired, accomplishing tasks that showed visible results and gave her a sense of purpose. She mended all the fences, weeded the entire garden, patched the barn roof, and then moved on to other projects that Vincent pointed out or that she identified herself. In the evenings, they would sit together and share meals that they took turns preparing, though Vincent was the better cook, and they both knew it. They talked about inconsequential things at first, the weather and the crops and the minor dramas of the chickens, but gradually the conversations deepened. Vincent told her about growing up on a different farm before the war, about his parents who had died of fever while he was away fighting, about his complicated feelings toward the kingdom that had drafted him, and the battles he had been part of. She told him about Orcish culture beyond the harsh warrior aspects, about the stories they told around fires and the songs they sang to remember their dead, about the beauty of the deep forest where her clan made their home, and the way moonlight looked filtering through the ancient trees. She found herself sharing things she had never talked about with anyone, dreams she had harbored of a different kind of life even before her exile, small rebellions against clan expectations that she had kept hidden. "I used to gather flowers," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields. "Not for any purpose, not for medicine or food, just because they were beautiful and they made me feel something gentle in a world that was always demanding I be hard. I hid them under my sleeping mat so no one would see and mock me for it." Vincent smiled at that, a soft expression that made her heart do something strange in her chest. "There is a whole meadow of wildflowers on the far end of my property. I will show you tomorrow if you like. I go there sometimes when I need to remember that there is beauty in the world to balance out all the ugly." He kept that promise the next day, leading her on a walk past the cultivated fields to wilder land where flowers of every color bloomed in profusion. Kessa stopped at the edge of the meadow and just stared, overwhelmed by the riot of color and the sweet scent carried on the breeze. Without thinking, she walked into the flowers and began gathering them, selecting the most beautiful blooms and arranging them in her arms like precious treasures. Vincent watched her with an expression she could not quite name, something warm and fond that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. When she had gathered a large bouquet, he showed her how to weave the stems together to make a crown, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate work. He placed it on her head when it was finished and stepped back to admire his work. "There," he said softly. "Now you look like the queen of the flowers." She laughed at that, the sound feeling foreign and wonderful after so long without real joy. "I am just an exiled orc playing in a field, hardly a queen." "You are whatever you choose to be here," he said seriously. "No one is telling you who you have to be or punishing you for being yourself. That is the whole point." The moment stretched between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them quite acknowledged. Kessa felt something shifting inside her, a growing awareness of Vincent not just as her benefactor or friend, but as a man who made her feel things she had no name for. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his arms when he lifted heavy loads, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to the animals or to her. All of it was building into something that both thrilled and terrified her. But she pushed those feelings aside, telling herself it was gratitude she felt and nothing more complicated. Humans and orcs did not mix that way, did not form those kinds of bonds. He was being kind to her because he was a good person, not because he saw her as anything more than someone who needed help. To think otherwise would be foolish and dangerous. Summer deepened, and the farm thrived with their combined efforts. The crops grew tall and healthy, the animals were well tended and productive, and the property began to take on an even more cared-for appearance than it had when Kessa first arrived. They developed an easy working rhythm, anticipating each other's needs and movements in the way of people who spent their days in close partnership. The outside world intruded occasionally in the form of neighbors who stopped by or merchants who came to buy produce and eggs. The first time Kessa saw visitors approaching, she instinctively hid in the barn, not wanting to cause problems for Vincent with her presence. But he found her there and gently but firmly insisted she come out and meet his neighbors. "You live here now," he said. "I am not going to hide you away like you are something to be ashamed of. If people have a problem with you, they can take it up with me." The neighbors, an older couple named Harold and Margaret who owned the adjacent farm, were surprised to see an orc but took their cues from Vincent's easy manner. Margaret recovered first and offered a cautious smile. "Well," she said, "I can see why your farm has been looking so good lately, Vincent. An extra pair of hands makes all the difference, does it not?" Kessa waited for the fear or hatred she had been taught to expect, but it did not come. Harold asked her about her work with genuine interest, and Margaret invited them both to a harvest festival the community was planning for the autumn. It was surreal and uncomfortable in ways she could not fully articulate, being treated like a normal person rather than a monster. But Vincent's steady presence at her side made it bearable. Not everyone was as accepting. A merchant who came to buy eggs took one look at Kessa and spat on the ground, calling her a savage and asking Vincent if he had lost his mind harboring an orc on his land. Vincent's response was cold and immediate, telling the man his business was not welcome here and he could find eggs elsewhere. The merchant left in a huff, and Kessa felt guilt settling heavy in her stomach. "You are losing business because of me," she said quietly after the man had gone. "Maybe I should stay out of sight when people come." "No," Vincent said firmly. "I do not want customers who think they can treat people that way. His coin is not worth more than your dignity, Kessa. Not to me." She did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and went back to work, but the warmth in her chest stayed with her for the rest of the day. As summer turned toward autumn, Kessa realized she had stopped thinking about her exile as a punishment and started seeing it as a gift, though she would never say such a thing out loud. She was happier here on Vincent's farm than she had ever been in the clan, more herself than she had ever been allowed to be among her own kind. The work was satisfying, the life was peaceful, and Vincent's friendship was the kind of solid, dependable goodness she had not known existed in the world. But there was also a growing tension beneath that contentment, a awareness that became harder to ignore as the days passed. She found herself watching Vincent when he worked, admiring the way his muscles moved under his shirt, or the concentration on his face when he was focused on a task. She looked forward to their evening conversations with an eagerness that had nothing to do with the food or the rest, and everything to do with simply being near him, hearing his voice, seeing his smile. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, a look that spoke of more than just friendship or even fondness. But then he would look away and the moment would pass, and she would tell herself she had imagined it because the alternative was too complicated to consider. The harvest festival arrived with autumn colors painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson. Vincent asked if she wanted to go with him, making it clear that she could stay home if she preferred. But Kessa found herself wanting to experience this human tradition, especially with him by her side. She wore her best shirt, and the skirt that Margaret had given her when she learned Kessa only owned men's clothing, and she let her hair hang loose instead of tied back for work. When she emerged from her room, Vincent stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly rough, and then seemed to realize what he had said and cleared his throat. "I mean, you look nice. Ready to go." The festival was held in a large, open area between several farms, with long tables laden with food and barrels of cider and beer, a space cleared for dancing, and people everywhere in their finest clothes. Kessa drew stares when they arrived, some curious and some hostile, but Vincent stayed close and introduced her to people as his friend and farmhand, his tone making it clear he would not tolerate disrespect. Most people were polite at least, and some were genuinely welcoming once they got past their initial surprise. Children were the easiest, staring at her with open curiosity but no real fear, asking questions about her tusks and her green skin with the blunt honesty of the young. She found herself relaxing as the evening wore on, trying the various foods and drinking cider that was far stronger than she had expected. When the music started and people began to dance, Vincent asked if she wanted to try. She had never danced before, had no idea how humans even approached such things, but the cider had made her brave, and she agreed. He led her to the cleared space and showed her the basic steps, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers, and they moved together in a way that felt natural despite her inexperience. "You are doing well," he said, smiling down at her. "A natural dancer." "I am just following your lead," she replied, very aware of how close they were, how his hand at her waist seemed to burn through the fabric of her skirt, how his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget they were surrounded by people. The music changed to something slower, and other couples moved closer together in response. Vincent pulled her a fraction nearer, and she went willingly, her free hand coming to rest on his shoulder. They swayed together more than truly danced, and Kessa felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, everything else fading to insignificance. "Kessa," Vincent said softly, his voice pitched only for her ears. "I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. "What is it?" But before he could speak, there was a commotion at the edge of the gathering. Raised voices cut through the music, angry and alarmed, and people began backing away from something. Vincent tensed and turned, putting himself slightly in front of Kessa as they tried to see what was happening. A group of orcs emerged from the darkness at the edge of the torchlight, 5 warriors in leather and fur with weapons at their sides. Kessa recognized them immediately despite the months that had passed, recognized the leader as Marga, the chieftain's daughter who had led the call for her exile. Her blood turned to ice in her veins as the warrior's eyes swept the crowd and landed on her. "There she is," Marga called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. "The weakling who was cast out. I heard rumors that a human was harboring an orc in these parts, but I did not believe it could be you, Kessa. Have you no shame at all?" Vincent's hand tightened on Kessa's and he stepped fully in front of her, his soldiers bearing coming to the forefront. "You are not welcome here. Leave now and there will be no trouble." Marga laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "A human giving orders to orcs. How amusing." "We have come to deliver a message to the exile. The clan has decided that casting you out was not enough punishment for your weakness. You are a stain on our honor. Kessa, and stains must be removed." The threat was clear, and several of the human men in the crowd moved forward, including Harold and a few others Kessa had met over the past months. Vincent held up a hand to stop them, his eyes never leaving the orc warriors. "She is under my protection," he said clearly. "If you want to harm her, you will have to go through me and everyone else here who considers her a friend. I do not think you will like those odds." It was a bluff, and everyone there knew it. 5 trained orc warriors could do terrible damage before they were brought down, and people would die in the attempt. But Vincent stood firm, and Kessa felt something break open inside her chest, a desperate need to protect this man who kept trying to protect her even when it endangered him. She stepped around Vincent before he could stop her, facing Marga and the others directly. "I will not let anyone here be hurt because of me. If you want to kill me, Marga, then do it. But leave these people alone. They have done nothing but show me kindness." "Kessa, no," Vincent started, reaching for her, but she evaded his grasp. Marga's expression was contemptuous as she looked Kessa over. "You would die for these humans, for a people who hate us and hunt us. You truly are weak and foolish." "Maybe I am," Kessa said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "Or maybe I am finally strong enough to choose my own path instead of following blindly where the clan demands. I have found more honor and acceptance in these past months among humans than I ever did in years among the clan. If that makes me weak in your eyes, then I will wear that label proudly." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a declaration both. Marga's hand moved to the axe at her belt, and the crowd tensed for violence. But then another figure stepped out from behind the orc warriors, an older orc with graying hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. Kessa's breath caught as she recognized Throck, her clan's chieftain and Marga's father. "Enough," Throck said, his voice a deep rumble that commanded instant attention. The warriors stepped aside to let him through, and he approached until he stood just a few feet from Kessa. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in her appearance, the way she held herself, the humans arrayed behind her and Vincent at her back. "Father, she has dishonored us," Marga protested. "She must be punished." "She was punished," Throck said without looking away from Kessa. "We cast her out, and that should have been the end of it. But you could not leave it alone, could you, Marga? You had to keep pushing, keep seeking blood when the matter was already settled." He turned then to face his daughter, his expression hard. "I allowed your judgment to stand before because I thought you were learning leadership, learning to make hard decisions for the clan. But this, coming here to start a fight with humans and kill an exile who has clearly made a new life, this is not leadership. This is cruelty for its own sake, and I will not allow it." Marga looked stunned, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Throck turned back to Kessa, and something that might have been regret crossed his weathered face. "I owed your brother a debt," he said quietly. "Crag saved my life in that raid, and I repaid him poorly by allowing his sister to be beaten and cast out for grieving him. I was wrong to permit it, and I am sorry." The apology hit Kessa like a physical blow. She had never heard an orc chieftain apologize for anything, had never imagined such a thing was possible. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Throck nodded slowly. "You have found a place here among these humans. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you stand. You are happier than I ever saw you in the clan, so I will make you an offer. Return with us, and you will be welcomed back. Your exile is lifted, and you may reclaim your place among our people. Or stay here, and know that the clan will not trouble you again. The choice is yours, Kessa, daughter of Grak." It was more than she had ever dreamed of, the chance to return home with honor restored. But even as part of her considered it, she knew what her answer would be. She had changed too much in her time here, had discovered parts of herself that would never fit into the rigid structure of clan life. And more than that, she could not imagine leaving Vincent, could not imagine walking away from the life they had built together. "I choose to stay," she said clearly, letting everyone hear. "The clan was my home once, but this is my home now. Thank you for the offer, Chieftain Throck, but my place is here." Throck studied her for another long moment, then nodded once, a sharp dip of his head that conveyed respect. "Then I wish you well, Kessa. Live with honor, whatever form that takes for you." He turned to the gathered humans, his gaze sweeping over them. "She is one of yours now. Protect her as she would have been protected among us, and know that the clan has no quarrel with those who shelter our cast-offs." With that, he turned and strode back into the darkness, the warriors following after him. Marga lingered a moment longer, her expression twisted with anger and something that might have been envy, before she too disappeared into the night. The tension drained from the crowd all at once, people beginning to talk in excited voices about what had just happened. Kessa felt her knees go weak and Vincent caught her, his arms coming around her to hold her up. "I thought they were going to kill you," he said roughly into her hair. "I thought I was going to watch you die and there would be nothing I could do to stop it." "I am sorry," she whispered. "I could not let them hurt you or anyone else because of me." He pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Do you understand what you just did? You had a chance to go back, to have your old life restored, and you chose to stay here. Why?" The answer was obvious to her, had been growing clearer with every day they spent together, but speaking it aloud felt terrifying and necessary. "Because I love you," she said simply. "Because somewhere along the way I fell in love with a human farmer who showed me that kindness is strength, and that I deserve to be myself. Because the thought of leaving you makes my chest hurt, and I cannot imagine waking up somewhere that you are not." Vincent made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of months of restrained feelings finally breaking free. She kissed him back with everything she had, her arms going around his neck to pull him closer, not caring that they were surrounded by people, or that this was the most public declaration possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the gathered crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Vincent laughed and pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes shining with emotion. "I love you too," he said. "I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it, afraid I was taking advantage or that you did not feel the same way. You are the bravest, strongest, most amazing person I have ever met, Kessa, and I want you to stay not just on my farm but in my life, permanently if you will have me." "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with happy tears that she no longer tried to hide. Yes to all of it. They were engulfed then by well-wishers, people crowding around to congratulate them and exclaim over the dramatic turn of events. Margaret was crying openly and hugged Kessa tight, telling her she was so glad the orc warriors had not taken her away. Harold clasped Vincent's shoulder and made some joke about him being lucky to land such a strong woman. The celebration took on a new energy, the music starting up again with renewed vigor. Kessa danced with Vincent again, but this time there was no hesitation in how they held each other, no unspoken tension in the space between them. They were open and public in their affection, and it felt like a weight lifting that she had not fully realized she had been carrying. The night stretched on with food and drink and joy, the community celebrating not just the harvest but the new couple in their midst. It was very late when they finally made their way back to the farm, walking close together under a sky full of stars. Kessa felt like she was floating, like everything that had happened was too good to be real. But Vincent's hand in hers was solid and warm, and when they reached the farmhouse he pulled her close and kissed her again, sweet and slow and full of promise. "Stay with me," he said softly. "Not in the spare room, but with me. Share my bed and my life and everything I have." "I want that," she replied. "I want all of it." They went inside together, and the spare room that had been hers stood empty that night and every night after. Vincent was a gentle and attentive lover, taking time to learn what pleased her and showing her what pleased him. And Kessa discovered a whole new dimension to the intimacy they had been building for months. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, she felt more at peace than she had ever been. "You think people will accept us?" she asked into the darkness. A human and an orc together, Vincent's hand stroked slowly through her hair. "Some will and some would not. But we have friends here, people who see you for who you are and not just what you are. That is enough to start with. We will build on that together." The autumn progressed, and they fell into new rhythms, working the farm as partners in every sense of the word. Vincent taught Kessa to read and write in the evenings, and she taught him some of the orc tongue and the songs her brother had once sung. They hosted their first dinner party with Harold and Margaret and a few other neighbors, and Kessa found herself laughing and comfortable in a way that still sometimes surprised her. Winter came, and the work shifted to maintenance and indoor projects. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning for the next growing season, making love and simply enjoying the quiet comfort of each other's presence. Kessa learned to bake bread, and Vincent proved surprisingly skilled at mending clothes, and together they created a home that reflected both of them. In the spring, on a morning when the world was coming back to life with new growth and birdsong, Vincent took Kessa out to the wildflower meadow. The early flowers were just beginning to bloom, splashes of color against the green grass. He held both her hands and told her again that he loved her, and then he knelt in the human way she had learned about and asked her to marry him. She pulled him back to his feet and kissed him instead of answering with words, and he laughed against her lips and slipped a simple band of silver onto her finger. They were married a month later in that same meadow, with Margaret and Harold standing as witnesses and a traveling priest who had heard about the unusual couple and wanted to meet them. Kessa wore a dress that Margaret had helped her make, white linen with green embroidery, and Vincent wore his best clothes and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The ceremony was short and sweet, the priest asking if they promised to love and cherish each other through whatever came, and both of them answering yes without hesitation. When the priest declared them married, Vincent kissed her thoroughly to the cheers of the small gathering, and Kessa felt her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration afterward was held at the farm, with tables set up outside and food enough for the 24 people who came to mark the occasion. Some brought gifts, practical things like tools and cloth and preserves, and all of them brought well wishes. It was not a large wedding by any measure, but it was perfect for them, a joining of two people who had found each other against all odds. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Vincent and Kessa stood together on their porch looking out over the land that was now truly theirs together. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arms around her, and they watched the stars come out in comfortable silence. "You ever miss it?" Vincent asked eventually. "The clan, the warrior life, any of it?" Kessa considered the question honestly before answering. "Sometimes I miss the forest or the old stories. I miss my brother always. But I do not miss who I had to pretend to be there. Here, I am allowed to be all of myself, the strong parts and the soft parts and everything in between. That is worth more than anything I left behind." "I am glad you found my farm that day," Vincent said quietly. "Glad you were brave enough to keep going even when everything seemed dark. My life is better with you in it, Kessa. So much better. Mine too, she said, turning in his arms to face him. You saved me, but not just from dying on that road. You saved me from a life where I would never have been happy, never been whole. I love you for that and for 1,000 other reasons. He kissed her softly, a promise and a benediction, and then led her inside to the home they had made together. The fire was banked low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and they undressed each other slowly, savoring every moment. Their lovemaking that night was tender and unhurried, a celebration of everything they had survived and overcome to get to this point. In the years that followed, their farm became known throughout the region as a place of welcome and acceptance. Other outcasts found their way there, orcs and humans both who did not fit into the rigid structures of their respective societies. Vincent and Kessa never turned anyone away who genuinely needed help, though they also made it clear that they expected anyone who stayed to work and contribute. Some stayed only briefly, getting back on their feet before moving on to whatever came next. Others became permanent parts of the small community that grew up around the farm, building their own homes on the edges of Vincent and Kessa's land, and creating a settlement that defied easy categorization. It was not quite a village and not quite a farm, but something in between, a place where differences were celebrated rather than condemned. Kessa found herself taking on a leadership role she had never expected, helping mediate disputes and offering advice to those who sought it. She was particularly good at working with young orcs who had been cast out for various reasons, understanding their pain and confusion in ways no one else could. Vincent joked that she had become a chieftain in spite of herself, and she supposed there was some truth to that, though her leadership style was nothing like what she had experienced in the clan. They never had children of their own, something that caused Kessa some sadness, but which Vincent assured her did not diminish his love or their life together. Instead, they became guardians and mentors to countless others over the years, young people who needed guidance or simply a safe place to grow into themselves. Their home was always full of life and laughter, and the organized chaos of people learning to live together across old divides. Harold and Margaret remained close friends until their deaths, peaceful passings in old age that Kessa and Vincent mourned deeply. Other friendships formed and some faded, the natural ebb and flow of life's connections. But through it all, Vincent and Kessa remained constant to each other, their love deepening with each passing season. There were challenges, of course. Prejudice did not disappear overnight, and there were those who viewed the growing settlement with suspicion or outright hostility. Merchants sometimes refused to trade with them, and officials from the nearest town came periodically to investigate reports of trouble that never materialized. Vincent handled most of these interactions with the patient diplomacy of someone who had learned to pick his battles, and Kessa stood beside him as living proof that orcs and humans could coexist peacefully. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the wildflower meadow where they had been married. It was summer again, and the flowers were in full bloom, a riot of color and scent that never failed to take Kessa's breath away. They spread a blanket and lay together in the sun, watching clouds drift lazily across the blue sky. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had chosen differently that night?" Vincent asked, his fingers laced with hers. "If you had gone back to the clan instead of staying?" Kessa rolled onto her side to look at him, taking in the silver that was starting to thread through his brown hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years of smiling. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine it leading anywhere good. I would have been miserable trying to fit back into that life after tasting freedom here. No, I made the right choice, the only choice I could live with. I am grateful every day that you chose me," Vincent said, reaching up to touch her face. Chose this life. You are my best friend, my partner, my love. Everything good in my world has you at the center of it. She kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude and joy into the gesture. When they broke apart, both were smiling, the kind of deep contentment that came from truly knowing and being known by another person. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me when I could not see myself, for giving me a place to become who I was meant to be. Thank you for loving me even when it was complicated, even when it would have been easier not to. Loving you has never been complicated, Vincent replied. It is the simplest, truest thing I have ever done. Everything else is just details we figure out as we go. They stayed in the meadow until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, talking and dreaming about the future they would continue to build together. When they finally made their way back to the farmhouse, lights were glowing in the windows of the other homes scattered around their land, families and friends settling in for the evening. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of laughter drifted on the breeze, the everyday magic of people living their lives in peace and safety. Kessa paused at the top of the hill overlooking it all, Vincent's hand warm in hers, and felt a wave of emotion so intense it brought tears to her eyes. These were not tears of sorrow or pain like the ones that had led to her exile so long ago. These were tears of joy, of overwhelming gratitude for a life she had never imagined could be hers, for a love that had transformed her understanding of what was possible. Are you all right? Vincent asked, concern in his voice, and she realized he was still wary of her tears even after all these years, still protective of her right to feel without judgment. I am perfect, she assured him, wiping her eyes and smiling so he could see she meant it. Just thinking about how far I have come from that day when I collapsed at the top of your road, broken and certain I was going to die. Look at what we have built, Vincent. Look at this beautiful life. He pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her temple. We built it together, he corrected gently, and we will keep building it for as long as we have. That is what love does, Kessa. It creates and grows and makes space for more love to flourish. They walked down the hill hand in hand as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, heading home to the farm that had become so much more than either of them had dreamed. Behind them, the wildflower meadow settled into evening quiet, the flowers closing their petals until morning, waiting patiently for the next time two people in love would come seeking beauty and peace in the simple act of being together. The orc girl who had been punished for crying had found not just refuge but redemption, not just acceptance but profound love, and in the finding had transformed not only her own life but the lives of everyone around her. And the human farmer who had chosen kindness over fear had gained a partner who matched him in strength and compassion, who challenged him to be better and loved him for exactly who he was. Their story became the foundation for something larger, a community built on the radical notion that differences could be bridges rather than walls, that love could cross any divide if people were brave enough to reach for it. And every spring when the wildflowers bloomed, people would gather in that meadow to celebrate not just Vincent and Kessa, but the possibility they represented, the hope that a better world could be built one act of courage and compassion at a time. It was not a perfect life, and not a perfect world. There were still struggles and sorrows, losses and setbacks that had to be endured and overcome. But it was a good life, a life rich with meaning and connection, and that was more than either Vincent or Kessa had ever hoped for in the darkest moments before they found each other. In the end, the story of the orc girl who was punished for crying became a story about the power of tears to wash away old hurts and make space for new growth. about the strength it takes to be vulnerable, and the courage required to choose love over hate. It became a story told around fires and dinner tables, passed down to children and grandchildren, evolving with each telling but always keeping at its heart the simple truth that sometimes the most important journeys begin with running away from the wrong place and toward the possibility of somewhere better, somewhere you can finally, truly be yourself. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the stars were bright overhead, Vincent and Kessa would sit together on their porch and remember the beginning of their story, marveling at how far they had come and how much they still had to look forward to. Grateful beyond measure for the day the orc girl found the farmer's land and chose to stay, chose to trust, chose to love, and in that choosing found her way home at last.